In this video, I'll talk about cloud security options. One of the big showstoppers with cloud computing adoption is trusting a third party to deal with perhaps sensitive data or IT systems. And in some cases, due to legal or regulatory reasons, you can't use public cloud providers. You've got to deal with on premises storage and running of IT systems. The first thing to consider is, are public cloud providers hacking targets? Because there are thousands of tenants sharing pooled IT resources, so aren't they a bigger target? Well, to a degree, there is some truth in that. But at the same time, with public cloud providers, economies of scale, because they have so many customers, allow them to focus on strong security. It's in their interest because that's their business. And they also have to go through third party audit compliance constantly to make sure that their IT practices and systems are hardened and trustworthy. There's also replication both within and between different provider data centers. This allows for high availability of IT systems as well as data. So it's part of business continuity to keep business operations running, even if we have an entire data center that's not reachable for some reason. Then there's encryption of data in motion, data being transmitted over the network. Now, that needs to be done, of course, over the internet, but also internally on internal networks or even private cloud networks where you might deploy virtual machines that talk to each other only within that cloud virtual network. Data at rest means that we've got stored data that should also be encrypted. Now, we might have to manually encrypt data before we store it in the cloud, or it might be available from the cloud provider. In this example, I'm going to upload a file to a cloud storage location. So here I'm just going to go to the Actions menu and I'm going to choose Upload. Now, once I've added a file to upload, here it's just a small text file. As I go through the wizard, here I'm going to click Set Details at the bottom. Notice I have the option to use server-side encryption. So this is one way that we can deal with cloud encryption for data at rest. We also have to think about the cloud provider and how they remove data. Now, of course, we can remove data stored in the cloud ourselves, but are there data remnants that are still available after the fact? Do they have any specific data sanitizing practices they use to make sure when we delete data, nobody else can get to it? Then there are virtual machines in terms of security, where we might configure them such that data center administrators can only start or stop virtual machines that we create, or perhaps even not. That would depend on your cloud provider and how you structure your virtual machines, and also what the provider supports. There's this concept called shielded virtual machines, whereby the contents of the virtual machine, running services and data, are completely inaccessible by data center administrators. All they can do is essentially stop the VM. Virtual networks are similar to creating a real network on premises, except it's done in the cloud on provider equipment. So, this is a network segment created in the cloud. We can also apply firewall rules for both inbound and outbound traffic. Ideally, you want to configure those rules, if they're not already done this way, to deny all traffic by default. You can poke holes in that firewall for only what is needed. Whether you're using Microsoft Azure, Rackspace, or in this case, Amazon Web Services, they all have similar options. For example, here I've got a public VPC or a virtual private cloud. This is just a virtual network in the cloud. Now, if I select it, down below under the summary area to the right, there's a network access control list or a network ACL for this network I've deployed in the cloud. And if I click on the link for it, it opens up a new window, and here I can control both inbound and outbound traffic. So traffic coming in to this network in the cloud or leaving. So I'm going to select the ACL from the list. Down below, if I click inbound rules, I can see the rules that allow traffic from certain locations or deny it. Of course, I could click the edit button, and if I really wanted to, I could add new rules. If I click add another rule, I can choose whether I want it to be for SMTP, SSH, all traffic, TCP, UDP, and so on and so forth. I can also determine the port or port range and the source IP address or network from which the connection comes from. Now that's inbound rules. In the cloud, regardless of cloud provider, we can also control traffic leaving a network that's deployed in the cloud. So there are outbound rules here down under the outbound rules tab. Cloud computing implies virtualization, whether we as cloud customers make the virtual machines ourselves or whether they're built when we run some kind of a wizard for some cloud service. Virtual machines can be created in the cloud from provider template galleries for a quick and easy deployment, or you can manually create virtual machines in the cloud yourself. You can even migrate existing on premises virtual machines to the cloud to reuse your investment that you've already spent in building VMs on premises. Now, when it comes to hardening, you follow standard operating system hardening guidelines. There really is nothing different about hardening a virtual machine in the cloud than there would be for a server you're hosting within your own office network or your own data center. So things like following the principle of least privilege, applying the latest software patches, reducing the amount of services, changing default configurations, that stuff doesn't really change whether you're talking about a virtual machine in the cloud, the public cloud, or a physical server or virtual machine running on premises in your control. Now, cloud management interfaces normally use HTTPS. Normally, we administer our cloud services through a web browser interface that's secured. We might also consider enabling auditing of activity so we can track who deployed or deprovisioned what in the cloud and when. We can also use role based administration so that we might assign a role with permissions to certain users so they can do only what is required to get the job done. Again, that adheres to the principle of least privilege. In this video, we discussed cloud concepts.